My name is Minerva Lockhart, and I learned the sound of humiliation long before I learned the sound of applause. It happened the night my father raised his glass at his own wedding and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "To my daughter, the desk pilot who never learned to fly straight." The room exploded with laughter. I just smiled, holding the glass so tight the stem cracked between my fingers. He called it a joke. I called it a warning, that in his world, a woman could serve, but never command. What he didn't know was that every man laughing that night would stand before me the next morning, saluting the same woman they'd just mocked. I never liked my father's parties. They smelled of cologne and old medals, of men who'd learned to measure worth by the size of their stories. Tonight was no different. The lodge in Montana hummed with laughter and clinking glasses. Men in dress uniforms traded war anecdotes like currency. Their faces were familiar from photographs I'd seen 1,000 times. My father stood at the head of the room, arm hooked through his young brides. Glass raised, grin wide enough to split his face. He aimed the joke at me, the kind that lands hard in a room full of men who know how to strike and then look away. Words spilled loud enough to be heard across the table, words that turned the air cold around my shoulders. Laughter rolled over me like surf. Someone nudged my arm and offered the expected consolations. "He's teasing, right?" I smiled. I held my glass until the stem bit my fingers. Under the chandelier's glow, my reflection wavered in the wine. A warped version of myself I could either match or dismiss. I thought of things I could say, of long nights leaning into instrument panels, of men I'd watched pull each other from flame. But the room wasn't built for those truths. In that house, a woman's voice arrived as a ripple and was dismissed as background. When the toast turned sharper, when they piled the joke onto itself, I answered with a line soft enough to seem polite and sharp enough to land. A quiet wish, raised to the room. The music swelled again. Someone laughed, because that's what people did. I set the glass down and listened. Tomorrow, these same men would be standing under my orders. Tonight, I let the glass speak for me. 2 days later, the Colorado wind sliced across my face like a blade. Peterson Space Force Base rose from the snow, steel gray and sharp against a white horizon. Smoke drifted from the hangars, dissolving into a sky the color of gunmetal. I parked the Jeep in front of the command building and looked up at the words carved into the stone arch. "Honor above all," my father's motto, still hanging there like a ghost that refused to die. Inside, the warmth did nothing to thaw the chill. A handful of men sat around the conference table, jackets unbuttoned, half-drunk coffee cooling beside them. Their voices filled the room, gruff, familiar, threaded with the kind of arrogance that came from never being challenged. "The old man ran this base like a damn clock," one of them said. "Hawkins." "Of course. Don't think anyone could replace him." I tapped the doorframe, just loud enough to make them turn. "Good thing I'm not trying to replace him." A few chuckled, thinking I was staff from headquarters. Hawkins leaned back, smirking. "Ma'am, visitors aren't allowed during briefing." "I'm not visiting," I said, slipping off my gloves. Their eyes caught the silver insignia on my shoulder. Silence hit the room like a slammed door. "I'm Colonel Minerva Lockhart," I said evenly. "Your new commanding officer." The air changed. A few men straightened. Others froze mid-breath. I walked to the head of the table, steady, deliberate. "You all served under a great man," I continued. "But nostalgia won't keep this wing in the air. Discipline will—" The words clanged in the stillness, cold and metallic. I dismissed the room, leaving them to swallow what they'd just learned. Behind me, I caught Hawkins mutter, "She's his daughter?" And another voice answer, "God help us!" That night, paperwork waited in neat piles on my desk. I flipped through my assignment orders until one line stopped me cold. Recommended by General Gordon Lockhart, Ret. I stared at it for a long time, the letters burning into me. When I called admin to confirm, the young officer on the other end sounded nervous. "Your father requested the placement himself. Ma'am, said you were the only one who could fix what's broken." I almost laughed. It wasn't trust. It was a setup, a challenge wrapped as approval, a way to watch me fall and call it proof. I leaned back in the chair, smirk tugging at my mouth. Challenge accepted, sir! Morning came hard and bright, the kind of light that showed every crack. I walked through the maintenance bay, boots echoing off metal floors. Machines sat half disassembled, wires loose, clipboards half filled. The place smelled of oil and neglect. "Why isn't the safety log updated?" I asked Sergeant Doyle, who barely looked up from his workbench. He shrugged. "Your father didn't bother with paperwork, ma'am. We got the job done." "Then maybe that's why I'm here," I said, meeting his eyes. To finish what he didn't. Down the hallway, I stopped before a framed photograph. General Gordon Lockhart, Commanding Officer, 1999-2004. My father's face stared out in perfect posture, jaw tight, eyes proud, untouched by time. For a second, I could almost hear him again, his voice, his rules, his legacy pressed into the walls like smoke that never cleared. "You still own this place, don't you?" I murmured. The sound of my heels echoed in answer as I walked away. That night, I sat alone in the office that bore my name. The brass plate on the door gleamed under the fluorescent light. Cole, Minerva Lockhart, Commanding Officer. The reflection off the metal caught my eye. Our shared last name glowing in silver. Same blood, same title. Two completely different meanings. I traced the edge of the plaque with my finger and whispered, "Your shadow stops here. Dad, I'll rebuild this place, and you'll see who's really fit to fly." Behind me, the base hummed with the sound of engines warming for night drills. It wasn't applause, but it was enough. The ghosts of his command were everywhere, etched in mottos, in habits, in men who still carried his pride like armor. But this time, they'd answer to me. The alarm shattered the quiet just as I was heading back to my office. A voice on the radio broke through the static. "HH-60W down in the southern training range. Possible casualties." I was already moving before the sentence finished. The hallway blurred into motion, boots slapping metal floors, adrenaline flooding every vein. By the time I reached the command center, the report was on my desk. Pilot error? Misjudged wind drift. No, the data didn't match. The wind had been steady, visibility clear. I opened the comm log, scanning timestamps. My pulse spiked when I saw it. Major Hawkins' voice giving an order to descend 2 minutes ahead of schedule. I called an emergency briefing. The room was packed, air thick with tension. Every eye followed me as I placed the report on the table. "Major," I said evenly, "you ordered that descent too early." Hawkins leaned back, arms crossed, his smirk the same one he'd worn at that wedding. "We were testing responsiveness. Your father would have approved. He believed guts over caution." The words hit like a knife between the ribs. My voice stayed calm. "Then maybe that's why I'm here, to teach this base the difference between guts and recklessness." He laughed, low and dismissive. "Don't tell me how to fly. Ma'am, you're desk brass now, not a pilot anymore." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. I stepped closer, close enough to see the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "That's an order, Major. From your commanding officer." The wind outside screamed through the hangars, a metal echo that carried every ounce of the restraint I refused to lose. That night, I walked through the hospital corridors until I found Kara Mill's room. Her leg was in a cast, her face pale but proud. She blinked hard when she saw me. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she whispered. I froze. "Maybe I'm not fit for this." I took her hand. "You didn't freeze. You followed orders. Don't ever apologize for that." The words were meant for her, but they struck something deep in me too. 15 years ago, I'd been called too cautious to command. Now I understood what caution really meant. Saving lives, not pride. Outside, snow began to fall over the runway. I watched it drift and thought, "You trained them to obey. Dad, I'll train them to think." 2 days later, chaos rippled through Peterson. Internal military news feeds blared headlines. 31st Rescue Wing under review for command instability. I didn't need to ask who started it. Colonel Reeves, my father's old comrade, now a strategic advisor, had been gathering signatures for weeks, whispering about how I was ruining the Lockhart legacy. I called an all-hands meeting. The hangar fell silent as I stood before them. Discipline doesn't mean nostalgia, I said, voice cutting through the cold air. It means standards. I don't care whose name is on the gate, mine or my father's. This unit follows protocol, or it answers to me. No one moved. Then Hawkins' voice rose from the crowd. We follow leaders who earn our respect, ma'am. I met his stare. Then you'd better keep up, Major. We've got a lot of work to do. That night, long after the lights dimmed, someone knocked on my door. Kara Mills stood there on her crutches, pale but determined, a USB drive trembling in her hand. Ma'am, she said quietly, I think you need to hear this. I plugged it in. The recording crackled to life. Unmistakable, my father's voice, calm, confident, cruel. My daughter's not fit to lead. She's soft. I gave her this command to prove a point. The air left the room. My throat burned, but I kept my face still. Kara's voice shook. I'm sorry. I found it in the comm logs by accident. I took a breath. You did the right thing, Lieutenant. Never hide the truth for anyone. By morning, the audio had leaked. Military news networks replayed his words on loop. My command was suspended for 48 hours pending review. Reeves moved fast, filling the void. Hawkins, newly loyal to him, took over daily operations. I walked the flight line as snow thickened into a blizzard. A young technician stopped. Nervous. Ma'am, everyone's talking about it. I smiled faintly. Let them talk. The wind always howls before it clears. That night, I sat in the dark office that still smelled of cold metal and coffee. The portrait of my father hung behind the desk. I stood, lifted it from the wall, and set it face down on the table. You wanted proof I can't lead? I whispered. Fine. I'll give you proof that I can. The monitor blinked. A new message slid across the screen. Severe snowstorm approaching San Juan Range. Training team out for recon. No contact. My pulse kicked hard. I scrolled the roster. The last name froze me in place. Major Hawkins. The phone rang, though. I was still suspended. Ma'am, we've lost contact with the San Juan team. 7 men, 1 aircraft, signals dead. I opened the map. A massive snowstorm was sweeping the range. Winds 90 knots. Temperature -25. The last name on the list froze me. Major Hawkins. Reeves tried to stop me. We can't deploy in this weather. Regulations don't breathe, I said. Prep the Hawk. I'm flying. Minutes later, the helicopter tore into the white void. Visibility vanished. Then we fly by instinct, I shouted. Through the static came Hawkins's voice. Mayday. 2 men trapped. Red flares cut through the storm. I found him half buried in snow, blue-lipped and broken. You came? He gasped. Next time you question a woman's command, I said, locking his harness. Make sure she's not the one flying in to save you. When the turbine froze, we crash-landed hard. I grabbed the radio, voice hoarse. Rescue 1 to base, survivors located, and tell General Lockhart. The desk pilot just landed. The wind answered. I sat beside Hawkins, covering him with my coat, the red light flickering across our faces like the heartbeat of something reborn. At dawn, they found us. Back at Peterson, hundreds lined the runway. My father stood at the center, snow gathering on his shoulders. When I stepped out, he raised his hand, a salute, slow and perfect. Welcome home, Colonel, he said. Good to be home, sir. That night, the message came. Command reinstated. I placed his photo upright beside the old compass. North again, I whispered. Hawkins appeared on crutches. Ma'am, I owe you my life. No, Major, you owe it to the lesson. Outside, a helicopter lifted into the blue dawn. For the first time, Dad, I murmured. I'm not flying your shadow, I'm flying mine. News spread through every Air Force base. Colonel Minerva Lockhart led unauthorized rescue during San Juan blizzard. Saved 8 lives. The photo of me stepping out of the snow-covered helicopter was everywhere. No one called me desk pilot anymore. 3 days later, the Department of Defense held a press conference at Peterson. In the front row sat the generals, the advisors, and my father, dressed in white, nameplate reading guest of honor. When the speaker finished praising the mission, he said, "Please welcome General Gordon Lockhart to present the award." My father approached the podium, unfolding a paper, then setting it aside. "This wing didn't just survive a storm," he said. "It was reborn in one. And it wasn't weather that tested us. It was pride." His eyes met mine. "I once said my daughter wasn't fit to lead. I was wrong." Applause rippled through the hall as he placed the medal on my chest. "You've done what I never could," he whispered. "You changed what command means." He saluted. I returned it. "Carry on, Colonel." "Yes, sir." Outside, the rotors thundered again, and after 20 years, the storm inside me finally went still. That night, the base was quiet. The celebration long faded into memory. The corridor outside my office echoed with the distant hum of generators and the soft whistle of wind against the glass. I was reviewing flight reports when the door opened. My father stood there, not in uniform this time, just a wool sweater and the tired stillness of a man who had carried too many years of command. In his hand was something I hadn't seen since childhood, a weathered brass compass, the words "Honor Above All" engraved across its lid. He set it gently on my desk. "This used to guide me," he said. But somewhere along the way, I forgot what direction meant. The needle trembled under the lamplight, pointing north, steady and patient. I met his eyes. "You didn't forget, sir. You just stopped looking up." A faint smile touched his face, worn, but real. "You flew higher than I ever did." I shook my head. "You built the wings. I just made sure they could carry others." Silence settled between us, not the brittle kind from old arguments, but something softer, an understanding that didn't need words. "You remind me of your mother," he said finally. "She had patience I never did." "And you taught me to survive it," I replied. He nodded, then turned for the door. I watched him leave, the outline of his shoulders framed in the dim hallway light. When the room fell still again, I picked up the compass. The metal was cold against my palm, but it pulsed with something alive, a memory, a promise, a reconciliation. "Honor above all," I whispered. The phrase no longer sounded like obedience. It sounded like peace. I set the compass at the center of my desk, its reflection glinting across the nameplate that read Lockhart. For the first time, the name didn't belong to him, or me alone. It belonged to both of us, finally pointing true north. 1 year later, the world felt quieter. I was teaching now at the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, where the sky seemed to stretch endlessly, like forgiveness itself. That morning, the graduation ceremony was held outdoors, under a pale spring sun. Rows upon rows of cadets stood at attention in their blue uniforms, crisp and shining. In the front row stood Lieutenant Kara Mills, no longer the timid trainee from that frozen mountain, but a decorated pilot ready to lead. She stepped up to the podium, her voice trembling only at first. "A year ago, I thought courage meant not being afraid," she said. "Then I met Colonel Lockhart, who showed us that courage is flying straight through the storm, not because you're fearless, but because people are counting on you." The audience fell completely silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. As she spoke, I saw myself in her, the same drive, the same doubts, but lighter, freer. Maybe that's what legacy really means. I thought, someone who flies higher because you cleared the wind below. After the ceremony, Kara found me in the crowd, her face glowing with pride. She handed me a small envelope. Inside was a photograph. Me standing in the snow that night. Red emergency lights casting my shadow over Hawkins, who knelt behind me. On the back, written in careful handwriting, "We learned what leadership looks like. Thank you for flying through our storm." I held the picture for a long time before looking up. A rescue helicopter passed over the mountain ridge, its silver body flashing against the sun, a mirror in the sky. Maybe that was never revenge. "Dad," I whispered. It was redemption all along. The sound of the rotors faded into the wide blue, until it was only the hum of wind and peace. Back in my office, the old compass still rested on my desk, its needle steady, pointing north. I traced the engraving, "Honor above all," and smiled. For years, I'd searched for direction. Now, I finally understood. The compass hadn't been leading me back to him. It had been leading me here, to the sky that, at last, belonged to both of us, 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 to both of us,